Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and this is a follow-up to my episode with Alanis. And for those of you who have not listened to Alanis's episode yet, Alanis shared a story that began in childhood, and it carried into two very different abusive relationships. She grew up with a father who was emotionally unavailable, volatile, unpredictable, and really quick to anger. And the emotional climate of this home just shifted around his moods. Everyone was always walking on eggshells. Everyone was bracing for the next change in tone, the next outburst, the next moment where this person who was connected to them at some points would just completely disappear. And later on, Alanis found herself in two abusive relationships that looked different on the surface, but the first relationship was openly cruel. There was humiliation going on, emotional instability, verbal abuse, physical violence, betrayal, and just a constant sense of being left off balance. And then the second relationship, it was a lot of mixed signals, a lot of attention and then distance, closeness, and then there was withdrawal, and just a lot of this push and pull that was going on, causing everything to be confusing, causing Alanis to have to try to read into everything that was going on. And it was just a really familiar terrain that was going on between both of these relationships and what was going on from her childhood, that there was just this instability that was going on. And it was something that she was familiar with. And each one of these individuals at the beginning made her feel that, she was going to be seen and appreciated and to not feel defective. And that was the inner hook. And then each one of them had their own thing going on. One of them was a real big victim player, and that's how he kept her there. And then the other one was big into the push-pulls of keeping her off balance, not knowing if it was going to be the good person or the bad person, and that kept her in there for a while. But before we now get to everything that we're going to be discussing on this show, because we're going to be discussing some key themes, and we're going to be discussing the fear, obligation, and guilt in Alanis' story. Before we even get to that, if you want to be a guest like Alanis was on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website, narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form, fill out the guest form, and then press the submit button. Also, we have a support group at our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. If you want to join our support group, we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights, and we have forum boards for you to post on to get validation that you need from survivors just like you. So join our support group today. And we also have a new newsletter at our website that has insights into our weekly episodes that go beyond this, and it comes with a free workbook as well. So that is all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And the first big theme in our debrief that we're going to be discussing is that childhood instability does not stay in childhood. And Alanis' story is that instability really became her conditioning, and she grew up around a lot of emotional unpredictability, around a dad whose moods really shaped the climate of the home. You're walking on eggshells, and sometimes she did connect with her dad, but then that connection would disappear. So this kind of environment is teaching Alanis and a lot of children things without actually saying anything. So it teaches Alanis how to monitor a room. It teaches them to track someone else's emotional state. It teaches them to be ready for shifts. It teaches them that closeness can vanish, and it teaches them that care does not always feel safe. And it can leave someone who's growing up in this environment to feel that something is wrong with them, that they could be defective even when no one is using those exact words. So when someone grows up like that, their nervous system is already ready and available and knows how to organize around an instability like this. So when they do get into a relationship and it is volatile, they know how to maneuver around it. They know how to organize around it. And with Alanis, what happened was once she kind of got that initial hook, then she was in that volatility and she knew how to manage it and work around it for a little bit before eventually she said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And another key theme here is being seen can be a really powerful hook. And for Alanis, being seen, or the feeling of being seen, was pretty big. And when someone grows up feeling unseen, when someone grows up feeling like something is wrong with them, being noticed can really land hard with a lot more force. And it's not just a romantic force, it's this emotional force. And it can be relieving. It can feel meaningful. It can feel like recognition. And in Alanis' story, in her first relationship, she's at first seen. And then once that happens, there it moves to where she's then being humiliated, ignored, left behind, and made to feel small. There's physical abuse that occurs. And then she falls into the hands of a slightly different type of abuser in the next relationship, who says the right thing at the right time. And he's someone that is giving her this spark of feeling recognized right at the beginning. And for Alanis, and for a lot of you, the hook here isn't necessarily like intensity that we hear in stories, or someone who's charming like we hear in stories. It's just that she's being pulled out of the background of where she always felt she was, and now she's being brought into the foreground for someone. And that was a huge hook for Alanis and for a lot of people. And once that hook is in place, that hook is in place. And the next key takeaway is victimhood is a form of control. And this stood out in the first relationship that Alanis was in. And with this type of victim, what was going on was they were repeatedly shifting a lot of the emotional things back onto themselves, so they didn't have to stay with the impact of what they were actually doing. So instead of focusing on the cruelty that was going on, or the betrayal that was going on, or the humiliation that was occurring, or how they were disappearing a lot of the time, or the violence that occurred, the focus was always moving back to them, their feelings, their explanations, their reaction, their hardships that they've had, their mood, their grievances, their version of why things are the way they are. So once that happens here with Alanis and survivors, you're getting pulled away from the clarity when the victim is doing that. After they've done this terrible thing, they're then shifting it. The victim player here is going to be acting like the wounded one, even though that you are the one that is hurt. And they're using this victimhood to keep you off balance. And once you're off balance, that's something that you're used to. You're used to that off balance feeling. And now you're organizing around the unstable person in the room instead of around yourself. So that's how victimhood was used in this relationship with Alanis. And then the next one we have here, and the last one we have, is push-pull can keep hope alive long after stability is gone. So in the second relationship here, it was much different, and it was all about push and pulls. It was closeness, then distance, attention, then withdrawal, intensity, then confusion, moments where you're feeling like you're chosen, and then moments when you're in the background again. So it's just enough hope to make the confusion last. And that is the rhythm that is going on for your nervous system. It's an intermittent reinforcement in a huge way. You're going to get the good. You're also going to get the bad. It's going to keep you off balance enough to give you hope. And every time this happens, the person is coming back. They're re-engaging in Alanis' story. Every time they're going to say the right thing, they're going to show interest. They're going to create some sort of intimacy and make it feel like something real is about to happen. And that's going to then emotionally reset the whole entire relationship. And this can keep someone in a relationship longer. And for Alanis, it definitely did. And it's because the person isn't showing up consistently. And that is what is happening. It's keeping the door open for a reopening to the story. And it's the big reason why this push-pull, intermittent reinforcement type of relationship in relationship number 2 was so powerful. The instability gave it power. And Alanis was used to her whole entire life of living in surfing that instability. So for her, and this can happen to anyone, but for her, it was quite powerful and able to keep her there. And up next, we have the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame. So the biggest fear for Alanis is the fear that if she names what is happening, that more distance will be created, more silence will be created, more stonewalling will occur, and just more emotional withdrawal. And why I think that is this comes through most clearly in the second relationship. She tells him that she feels a little bit invisible, and after that, he stops talking to her, stops looking at her, withholds affection, and she says that she felt like she couldn't bring things up because that would push him away further. So at this point, the relationship is being kicked down the road even further, because if she feels like if she brings something up, the fear of that means that she's going to be put into a doghouse. There's going to be this withholding, these silent treatments. He's going to move away from her completely. So even though it's not an outburst, it is still an outburst. And she doesn't want to feel this at all. So she's not going to speak up or talk about how she's feeling. So it's a fear of conflict, a fear of this atmosphere change, and a fear of abandonment in a broad sense. And that fear that speaking honestly about her hurt, she believes that it will lead to more punishment. So that's the fear right here that's keeping her in this relationship and this type of control that is going on. And then we have obligation. And obligation, I wish I saw this during the recording, but Alanis' biggest obligation that kept her trapped was commitment to the music, commitment to the band, and their shared musical world that they inhabited. And this was in relationship number 2. And this is what made her situation really difficult to escape compared to other relationships. And a lot of time we hear that there's obligation to a family, obligation to the relationship, but we never really hear about like the world that she lived in before with like the band or the music, a thing that's kind of outside it, but it's still part of her world. So when she made this person, her abuser, a permanent member of her own band, she says out loud, this is probably not the best idea, but I really liked his playing. So the obligation here starts to play out in different ways. So they had rehearsals, shows, tours, mutual bandmates. Even after she ended the thing, she had to keep seeing him. Obligation here, she had to keep the band's functioning. Alanis had to protect the band's functioning here. And the other one here is the shared community. And we have commitment to the music, the band, and the community around it, the shared musical community around it. And for Alanis, that was a really big thing. It was the original connection which they had, music as a whole, playing music together. So now this person is now fully in this world, and she is unable to separate them from this world. It's a very difficult thing. They've now become intertwined into her world, and she has an obligation to this band and this world that she's in, this community that she's in. So now by protecting the band, this person's still in there. It's hard to set boundaries when now this person has become part of the band. It's become part of your family. This community is her family. It was really interesting to me that this is what occurred. And she then starts to have boundaries saying like, okay, we can't have a relationship outside of the band anymore. We can only have a relationship inside this band. We have to keep this connection going to keep the music going. So there's this whole thing about an obligation to keep this band going, which keeps her in contact with him. And then there's the shared community aspect of things. They have mutual friendships now. Her thought process of what is she going to tell all these people in the community? This is another fear, a fear that I could have mentioned before, is like she feared that this person would twist the narrative, play the victim to their shared circle, all of those things. So that's another fear in this obligation, but it's also part of the obligation to this shared community. So the music obligation here essentially gives him this guaranteed repeated access to her long after she really did know that she emotionally needed out of this relationship, which made it very hard to leave once this person is now fully entrenched in this band. You can look at the band and this community as your family unit that she was trying to protect. And at that point, it became very difficult to detach from this person. And up next, we have guilt. And for guilt, we're going to skip over guilt today, as I don't really think, guilt ran Alanis. I think the focus should more be on shame here. And shame here is one of the biggest things in Alanis' story, because it was already there before any of these relationships began. As we've already discussed, she grew up with the feeling that something was wrong with her, and it wasn't because someone said it to her directly. It was because of the emotional environment that was taught to her. She grows up around instability, emotional distance, unpredictability. So later, she absorbs that message that she's not really worth much, and over time, that just doesn't hurt her. It becomes part of how she sees herself. So she's not going to be seeing herself as, I did something wrong. She's going to see herself as, something is wrong with me. So for Alanis here, and for survivors and victims, you learn here not to question the relationship, but the shame here is having you question yourself of what is going on, that you are the problem, and that's the reason why things might not be going well. And that shame here, it just kind of reinforces her belief that she is defective. And with that feeling in there, this is the type of relationship that she might be feeling that she deserves, which can keep you in these relationships much longer. So that is our fear, obligation, and guilt. And the goal going forward that we have for Alanis, the goals that we have, is to separate her musical identity from her romantic one. And both relationships lived inside a music world. Until those are really disentangled, she'll keep mixing creativity, creative vulnerability with emotional vulnerability in ways that can be exploited. Another one we have on our list is to grieve the father that she never had. So both of you abusers were essentially her father in different costumes. And the next one we have on our list is to learn to receive care without guilt. And Alanis was consistently catering to other people while minimizing her own needs. So the goal here is to learn that needing things from other people is not the same as being too much. And then the next one on our list is to build a self-worth that exists independently of relationships. So for Alanis, her sense of being was being defective, and it predated both relationships. So the goal going forward is to construct an identity rooted in her own values, her own talents, rather than in whether someone is showing up for her. And then the last one on our list is to establish relationships outside the music scene. So her entire social and romantic world was all interconnected into this one community, and that gave partners enormous leverage over her with reputation, friendships. Widening her world will reduce that leverage when you kind of branch out a little bit more. So I hope this follow-up episode was useful, the fear, obligation, and guilt, and our key takeaways from Alanis' story. I felt it was really interesting in the aftermath here when it came to seeing her band as this family that I didn't explore during the episode, but I should have. But we did it here, and hopefully you found that useful. Maybe some things like that are happening with you in your communities where you're protecting a community. And it could be maybe a Facebook community or some sort of community, knitting community, who knows? And that can be your family as well and represent that. And you might have an obligation to keep that going. So hopefully this was helpful for people that are going through the same thing. And if you want to be a guest like Alanis was this week on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out our guest form, and press the submit button. Also, if you need support, join our support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. We have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights, and forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. Join it at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today's debrief, for today's follow-up episode. And I hope you have a good night.